Welcome to the Voices of LTCI, presented by the Helper Bees. This is a podcast about the industry that's shaping the way millions of older adults are aging, focusing on stories from those who got us here and those who are carrying us forward. These are the Voices of LTCI.
Hey everybody, I'm Shar. I'm the CEO of the Helper Bees, and welcome to another episode of Voices of Long-Term Care Insurance. Here today in Austin with Stephanie Minnick. She is principal and co-lead of the long-term care practice at Oliver Wyman. So thank you for coming in on a very hot day here in Austin.
Very hot here. It is nothing like Portland, although apparently right now it is the exact same temperature as Portland.
That should scare everybody, I think. Well, thank you for being on the episode. I'm particularly excited because we usually have fantastic conversations. We just spent about an hour and a half having a great conversation. Hopefully we didn't go through all of our content, but I know one question we haven't hit on, and I'm particularly curious, is how did you get your start in long-term care insurance?
So I started at Milliman right out of college, and I was adamant that I wanted to be in healthcare consulting because it seemed more dynamic, it seemed more interesting, fluid, challenging. Didn't even know what long-term care was. It wasn't even a blip on my radar. And so I ended up at Milliman under the premise that I was going to be part of their team working on healthcare, specifically ACA. Right before I started, one of the members of their long-term care team had resigned. And so I was immediately thrown onto the long-term care team. It took me a really long time to understand and have any kind of appreciation for what the heck morbidity was, like lapse, mortality. I got those. I hated it. I thought it was the worst thing ever. And then I got really lucky. I had a wonderful client that used us for a lot of support across all of their actuarial functions related to their long-term care block. And while a lot of my peers were working on rate increase filings, I was getting the opportunity to help with assumption setting really early on in my career and to actually price and design a product. And I started in 2011, so that was kind of right at the tail end where people were leaving the market. So to have the opportunity to work on pricing and product design at that time for the LTC industry, I loved it. And I think that's really what opened my eyes to how interesting and dynamic this problem of providing insurance to those who are aging. It's so necessary, but we don't have a solution yet. There's still a lot of problems to solve. And I think that's what keeps it so interesting. You don't really get bored. So I absolutely hated it. I was like, get me out of here. I couldn't, but I'm a convert. I don't think I could do anything else now.
No, I am too. I mean, it seems like it's a weird world because it's like, is it a health product? Kind of, maybe. But
sometimes.
Is it a life product? Maybe not.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of intricacies and complexities.
Yeah.
Do you approach it mostly just from the actuarial lens? Or, I mean, we're fast forwarding a little bit, but like your work with Oliver Wyman, it seems like the way I know it is you don't only view it through an actuarial lens. Like you've got a fairly large scope as how do you see it. Tell me a little bit more about that, specifically with some of the work you've recently been doing.
Yeah, so I started in Actuarial. I got to do help clients with all the facets of actuarial work. So pricing, assumptions, financial reporting, modeling. I got to do the whole gambit. And I think I've more recently had the opportunity to shift some of my focus away from sort of the true actuarial processes and functions to having insight on things like operations, how are claims managed. And I'm not gonna do operational work. I'm an actuary, but I think having that purview into how those who are dealing with claims and processing claims and paying claims and how that works. I think that function, underwriting, I've gotten a little bit of time, getting some insights in underwriting. And then most recently, I had the opportunity to work with California to design a public program, and that opened my eyes to a whole different set of issues and strategies around how politics, we can see that this is a need. I think you and I both can see that and understand that. And I think even the general population has the understanding that we need to do something to support our peers as they age. But it's a very complex problem. And so when I was like, I want to do work with public entities to try to figure out a public solution that's collaborative. I didn't factor in how challenging and how nuanced some of the political considerations are. It's a lot more challenging than I anticipated. Rewarding, but also it adds a whole another layer of complexity. So it's been fun to see that strategy and just try to visualize how can public fit in, how can private fit in, where can wellness vendors fit in, how can we take all of these pieces that have a role and merge them together into something that can help solve our problem of aging without support.
So usually I ask, like, what's a large milestone or event or development in your long-term care insurance career? But I'm going to ask that question specifically, though, the public-private partnerships. What are you learning? You mentioned that there's a tremendous amount of complexity, which I can't even imagine. But without getting into sort of the output of the work necessarily, but what are you personally learning through it? Is it that it's just complex, or is it something else that you're sort of starting to untangle and take away?
So I think the complexity is definitely a lot more than I initially imagined, but I think how personal it is. Our meetings are open to anyone really. It doesn't have to be a Californian. It could be, they're usually held virtually, so it could be anyone across the United States, and we get a lot of people from the public to come and share their personal stories, and I know that it's potentially more biased towards individuals who are trying to champion a public program, so you certainly are going to hear some more shocking and just revelationary experiences, but it's just been the personal aspect. I think I started in actuarial, kind of always been in actuarial, and to humanize what we do. I think that's been probably one of the most interesting parts of it. And then just trying to figure out, as complex as an insurance product, so trying to figure out how do you balance all these pieces when you start bringing in the concept of providing this care to everybody and trying to make sure there's a value proposition. I really like problem solving, and I think it takes that to a whole nother level.
So let's pull on a little bit. How do you take that to your team? Because you guys are, I know, leaders in the wellness space as well. At Oliver Wyman, you'll have a great survey that I know a lot of people look at. How do you take those numbers, which are representative of what the industry as a whole is doing, behind those are millions or at least tens of thousands of lives? How does that inform your practice as co-lead? Is it something that you and your team talk about? I mean, from a mission perspective or from an analytics perspective? I'm curious how you operationalize that.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time trying to identify areas where we perceive gaps, whether it's gaps in the data that's available, whether it's gaps in how, where the private sits, where the public sits, just generally gaps in services provided. And we spend a lot of time conjecturing about what can we do to get ahead of the next problem that's inevitably going to face this industry. I think a lot of that has, like, right now you've got the standalone business, you've got combination LTC products that pair with like a life or annuity chassis, and they're in very different places than the product life cycle. And so, looking at what's happening with the traditional standalone long-term care business, what problems are they facing now? How are they powering through that? How are they coming up with new and innovative approaches? A lot of that can help inform how these long-term care combination product writers can start to get ahead of the things that might be down the road for them as their policyholders get older. So I think a lot of what we try to do is take the pieces that we learn from all of the different aspects of the LTC insurance industry that we're involved in, and concatenate that into, like, holistically, how do we help? Like, how are we most effective in helping the industry move forward?
Well, if we go more specifically into that, you and I were chatting a little bit about this, but any words of wisdom for those embarking on wellness programs or have already embarked on a wellness program who haven't had a third party come in and analyze the program design or analyze the efficacy? I'm a big believer in a third party. As a provider of services, I like that impartiality. We tend to push for that. Not everybody advocates for that. Any words of wisdom of sort of A, the pros and cons of the approach, or B, how to sort of dip your toe into it? Let's say you're you're a leader of a wellness program within a carrier, you don't have a huge budget, and analytics can be quite expensive. And sure, I might be able to do that in-house. Any words of wisdom to them to how to socialize this up the chain?
Yeah, I think I personally think it's really important to get an independent view because it adds a level of credibility to your results. It gives some impartiality. I think if you're running a wellness program and you have a vested interest in its success, and not to invalidate the measurement and analytics that those who are running wellness programs are doing, I think it's wonderful. But to have another entity, a third party, come in that's independent and look at it from a different perspective with the holistic industry perspective that they have, it can help you see things that you didn't necessarily see, identify patterns that you didn't necessarily think could even exist, and it just adds a level of credibility to those results, to that, whatever your measurement metric is, whether it's return on investment, whether it's claim incidence impact, whether it's utilization. I think it just gives you additional confidence in the result. But more than that, I think it's just the collaboration. Anytime you bring another entity in, you get a whole nother set of perspectives. And I feel like with wellness especially, we're all learning this together, and we're all trying to find ways that we can be more impactful on policyholders and on the bottom line of the claim cost expectations. And even if you don't have budget to have an independent party do a full-scale analysis, actuarial work, measurement, you can still have someone come in and take more of a strategic, high-level view. And maybe they peer review your analysis, or maybe they are a sounding board to you. But I just think that additional perspective, when you're learning something new, can be so valuable to help you see the things you don't see.
Yeah, I mean, I would second that. I think working with the carriers that we've worked with, I mean, we as a provider of wellness programs have learned a lot from folks like you guys, where you're looking at, again, holistically across the industry, different blocks, different ages, different program design, and bringing all that knowledge in. We as a provider of wellness program are bringing all the policyholder engagement information, like how are they interacting with the program, what are they saying, what's the efficacy of the actual intervention, less on the claims cost side. Budding those together and merging them across programs is really wildly fascinating. So we have definitely approached it as not a threat at all. We have a large data analytics team, but we complement each other quite well to say, but we're not an actuarial team. We don't think in that direction. We think as wellness providers.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting too, because with wellness and long-term care, so much of it is behavior driven. And I mean, even incidents, there is a behavior component to the choice of using formal services or not using formal services, or this care setting or that care setting. And human behavior is not always rational. And so actuaries tend to think in rational, does this make sense? Yeah. Does it follow the norm? So when you start partnering up non-actuaries with actuaries to look at this problem, I think, especially when there's a behavior element involved, you get a better understanding of kind of what you don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So it helps to talk to others.
Yeah, I want to underline a point you said. You don't have to engage with your team on a full-scale analytics pre or post program, just even strategic experimental design or strategic approach, even mid-flight, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
Or even post-program. So I just want to make sure folks understood that, because we've definitely benefited from that approach, and I think it's really a powerful one.
Yeah, establishing measurement frameworks. You don't have to have the independent party do the measurement, but if you establish a good framework and you do it up front, you set yourself up for success, and it makes your life in the future, when you're actually getting the experience coming in, you have a process, you have a framework. You probably still are going to have to pivot because, again, unexpected things happen, but spending the time and getting that additional independent perspective on how to do the measurement, what to look at, where to look, can be really, really insightful.
Great. You hit on something, I don't know if you can expand a little bit on the behavioral dynamics of this. It's interesting because actuarials, to me, mathematics, fairly well defined. Behavior, not at all. You hinted at that. John Sieben and Rhett Weiland over at Pru are huge proponents of saying, really the metric that matters with most of your programs is the ability for a policyholder to change behaviors. That's true for any wellness program out there in the world, whether it's long-term care insurance or health plans. How are you approaching that from an analytics perspective? Because we've run into challenges there. We define risk triage tiers, we have engagement tiers and everything like that, and they're okay surrogates for that. But how have your analytical models changed to adapt to like quantifying that behavior?
So I think that's really hard to do, just because as an actuary we tend to think in terms of averages, and when you think about behavior, it's the fact that it is somewhat random. There's probably generally themes, but I think you have to step a little bit aside from the analytics to actually set assumptions or design metrics, measurement metrics that can quantify behavior. Because just saying, I had my incidence went up or down, or I think you and I were talking about, if you have a pre-claim program, you're changing their behavior around going on claim. So the reasons that we see people claim might be different in the future as we change where they're getting help already, where they need help in the future. And so just thinking through not only like the short term, but the longer term effects of what you're doing and how it can change someone's situation, and therefore change their behavior, is really important. And it's hard, again, you start to talk about actuarial numbers, it's hard to quantify behavior because it can be random and we tend to do average.
So you mentioned something that's I think is really important, which is quantifying the long-term effect of these programs. We're in the early days. We're step one, I think, as a whole industry. Let's say you're a new provider who's doing a pretty niche solution and didn't move incidence rates over whatever span of evaluation. It's somewhat heartening for me to hear that you said, you can't just rely on averages. What do you do to dive deeper to say, extract information like, maybe it didn't move incidence rates over this 12-month period of time because, hey, maybe the framework wasn't built so that you could do that. You were targeting 72-year-olds, and there's not that ability to move the needle on the bottom line. How have you all approached it, and how have you counseled carriers or those running programs? It's like, hey, let's think of on a broad sense of this, of like, we're moving in the right direction, and here's why.
So I think there's a couple ways you could tackle that. The first one is if you think about your incidence rate and how you're setting your target, it's important to look at who is making up that average. So if you are just looking at like the highest level metrics, you have to set up your process, your data that you're getting, to be able to delve a layer deeper, multiple layers deeper. Because if you could have two completely different populations that have claimed, and on the surface, you maybe could see that the incidence rate is completely unchanged. But the mix of who's on claim, the characteristics of who's on claim, maybe it's gender, maybe it is even a layer deeper and it's, certain locations, certain, like how close are they to family members? Like, are they a certain type of like social interaction? If you can get to a more detailed data on who your policyholders are and who it is that is claiming before versus after implementing your wellness initiative, and you see differences there, then I think at least you can start to try to quantify and understand, if I have X% more of these, characteristics on claim, that might actually mean that in the long term my incidence can go down.
That's a great point. So just verifying selfishly as a provider, when you do that, when you drop down into a different layer, of course you're splitting your population smaller and smaller. You lose statistical significance. But I think what we've been careful, and I'm going to have you fact check me on this, we've been very careful to say, we know it's not statistically relevant, but the data suggests a particular behavior in this subcategory, when magnified on the whole, is actually pretty significant. Agreed on this program in this splice. But I think given that we're at step one, our whole goal as an industry, I think, needs to build up enough confidence and enough early indicators to say there's enough here that we should go deeper.
Yeah, I think that I agree with that. And I think to have that confidence requires a deeper understanding of what is driving claims, who is claiming, why are claims the way, like the size that they are, the setting that they are. And if you have a really good understanding of your claimant profile, then when you see those anomalies or those this could be a big saving, we just have to give it time. I think that just gives you more confidence to make that assertion.
Good, great. All right, well, last question. I'm gonna put them into two. What areas of innovation or change within the industry are you most excited about seeing? And just comment in general, building off of that, like your general feeling for the industry as you hit it in 2011 now. You've been in it for a little while. Like, give us your general temperature check.
I think I'm biased. I love this industry. It is incredibly frustrating because it feels like a lot of the time that you're making incremental forward progress, and then either there's a curveball, or there's some other environmental change that you feel like we were almost making forward progress, or we are making forward progress, but there's still so much more. The product still hasn't taken off. There's still a gap in need, and I think I'm very optimistic, because as you look at the way that wellness programs are being implemented, you look at the spotlight that we have on long-term care, long-term service support needs at the public sector level, and you start to piece all of this together. I'm optimistic that if the public sector gets involved, public-private collaboration can help give this industry momentum to get to touch a wider subset of the population with wellness. I'm optimistic that if you can identify things that will help the policyholders take ownership of their health earlier on in their aging process, that you'll still have long-term care claims, but hopefully those claims will be more manageable, and they'll be more supportive versus someone needing 24/7 care at a younger age. We can push that out. We can figure out a way that the public sector can help support. We can figure out a way that wellness can wrap around as a overarching theme in the industry, and I feel like there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
Still a lot of problems to solve, but yeah.
I think that's a point that even folks on this podcast who have been unbelievably insightful, we've hit on, but we haven't hit on, I think, this directly, which is the work we're doing within our own blocks, or as an industry within the Wellness Consortium, or broadly, at our large conferences. I think pretty soon the nation, and perhaps even the world, is going to look at what we're building as a model for what programs should we have from whether we call it wellness or not, to promote independence at home. Mm-hmm. And we're not far away from that. And so I think there is a big push in my mind to say, let's stay the course. Like, folks might not have a slam dunk when it comes to a program, but we're moving in the right direction. And the important part is continue to experiment, continue to try, have a really great framework. I think is critical to evaluate programs, but taking a long view on it is going to be really
You have to have
key.
a long view. Yeah, if you have a short view on long-term care, it seems like that's counterintuitive given the name.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I know you're busy. I've really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate all that you've done.
Yeah, I always love talking to you, Shar. Anytime.
Thanks.